This is the final recording for part 3, which dealt with dealing with all of the different types of test questions that we can have. And so today we're going to look at portfolios, seeing the big picture. We are beginning to use portfolios in the technical college system. I and others teach a course called Jobs 2450. And one of the things that students need to do before they can finish the course is to complete a very minimal portfolio. They are introduced to portfolios usually in the orientation course to kind of tell them what they are and how they're used. But then at the end of their coursework, hopefully the semester before they graduate, they take the Jobs 2450 class, and you put together a portfolio that you could use if you would go into an interview. This is going to be a little bit different. We would be putting portfolios together in order to kind of come to a grade for a student. And so let's kind of take a look at portfolios and see how they're used in assessment. They are a relatively new way to assess outcomes. These things do go back quite a ways. When I taught drafting well over 20 years ago, one of the things we had our students do was to put together a portfolio, because our employers, when they would go to an interview, would certainly ask the student to see some of their work. And so what we would do is, when they would get ready to go to an interview, we would have them go to a local business and office supply house there in Crowley and purchase a large carrying case that was pretty much cardboard with a couple of handles on it that could fold up together, and they could keep their drawings all the way up to an 18 by 24 sheet or 24 by 36 sheet, depending upon what size you got, nice and flat. And so like that, when they walked into their interview, they could just lay out that their drawings and let their prospective employer examine them and ask them any questions that they wanted to about them. And so it does go back a ways, but it's rather new in the assessment area. And so they're especially good to measure outcomes that aren't easily assessed in more traditional formats, like your regular old standardized test or your objective test. So that being said, what are they? Who uses them? And how do they benefit the user? So let's go ahead and address those questions right now. A portfolio is a collection of work that shows effort, progress, and accomplishments in one or more areas. And so if a student was taking a creative writing class, they could show examples of their poetry, their journal, their essays, and then maybe any kind of critiques or criticisms of other people's work. You know, this would probably lend itself very, very well for this type of course. But what about vocational education? Can you think of any kind of courses besides maybe drafting that would be something that would be beneficial? Portfolios allow for an expansion of the material being covered, not bound to one area of knowledge. And so you can kind of get a a real good feel for all of the work that a student has done while they're in school. I was told that by a number of students that have just graduated from high school is that their high schools make them put together a portfolio for whenever they go to college. I didn't realize that that some colleges ask for that. I guess it gives the student services people a little better idea of what the student knows or what the student's experiences were in high school. I guess something that would turn me off quite a bit to do this is it takes a lot of effort to evaluate. You're basically making some subjective judgments based on that student's portfolio. Do you agree with some of the things that they have on there? Maybe you don't, and who's to say who's right? You know, but sometimes subjectivity is warranted. Let's face it, if let's say our schools tomorrow would decide that we want our high schoolers to have portfolios, then, you know, maybe we would look at every student's portfolio based on what we think they need in order to succeed at a technical college. Now, of course, that would probably, you know, differ for every school based on every person that would evaluate that thing, but all in all, you can have some kind of subjective judgment based on some criteria that you've got. And let's face it, we probably do the same thing in our shops anyway. Take welding, for instance. A student does a uphill corner bead, and so they weld those 2 or 3 little pieces of metal together, and then they bring it to the instructor. Now, I don't know any welding instructors that have some kind of standard to judge, you know, every one of those welds by either photographic or models or whatever. All I see them do is to go out there and they look at the metal and say, look at what you did here, and they just point out, this didn't get enough penetration here, the weld is too thin here, and they go through basically a subjective critique of that practice assignment that the student does, and tells them, go back, do it again, or else, yes, it's good, move on to the next assignment. So, you know, subjective types of grading is no big deal. We do it all the time, but yet we just don't really do it in a portfolio type of environment. But still, your objectives are important. You know, if we're doing some NCCR training, you know, we got some standards we gotta meet, and there's, you know, absolutely nothing wrong with those standards. In fact, they're wonderful things to have. But yet, it's a subjective evaluation on the part of the instructor. Here's some advantages and disadvantages of portfolios. They're flexible, so I guess you can use them for a lot of multiple types of things. They're highly personalized for both the student and the teacher. You know, the teacher can kind of set the criteria of how they want the portfolio to look, and the contents of the portfolio are going to be different for every student. They are an alternative to traditional methods of assessment. They're just a new way to get something done. And they are possibly a creative method of assessment when other tools are either too limiting or inappropriate. You know, I'll be quite honest, I'm kind of hard pressed to think of some instances in our system where portfolios would be appropriate, um, but it doesn't mean they wouldn't. Maybe y'all can come up with some ideas that maybe I've just got a block or negative bias towards portfolios. Who knows? The disadvantages. They are time consuming to evaluate, and boy, that would be my big turn off right here for them. I just don't have time to sit down and grade those things all day. They do not cover all subjects well, nor can they be used with all curriculum types. I think that kind of stands to reason. With some programs and some curriculums we might lend themselves quite well to that. Others, I don't think you want to do it. I don't think that you can put a portfolio together for truck driving. It might be kind of difficult to do. And they can be relatively subjective. You know, it's pretty much the teacher's call to what he or she wants in that portfolio. Now, some characteristics of maybe some portfolios. Good portfolios ought to have formative and summative in nature. It ought to look at what the student has done and look at all the things that they've done from the beginning of the course or the beginning of their course of study all the way to the end. So you want a continuous kind of evaluation there. And like it says here, the value evaluation is continuous. It's throughout the course from start to finish. And then there's a final evaluation. Once all the portfolios put together, you kind of look at the whole thing and see if it meets your objectives. The product represents the multi-dimensional nature of the task. You know, things that we do in our vocational classrooms are very complex. Even though they may look simple, they have a lot of dimensions to it, content-wise, skill-wise, knowledge-wise, and so you can kind of tie all those things in together with portfolios. And, you know, don't be narrow in your thinking. You can be just as wide open and broad in what these things could look like. So you're really not limited by a certain format. Now, I guess this would be one thing that I would like here. Allow students to participate in their learning. Maybe they can decide, you know, what would be appropriate to put in the portfolio. And it makes them an active part of the educational process. And I think that, you know, anything that we could do to kind of give students ownership to their education would be a good thing. And you would always try to give continuous feedback about the work that goes into it. And it would allow teachers to become more involved in curriculum design and implementation. You know, so many times our curriculums are all canned and packaged for us, and pretty much we just put there to deliver the goods. But here you would have to be more actively involved in the curriculum to examine, you know, whether or not this would be appropriate or not to put into a portfolio, and to see what kind of new things would need to be put in continuously. And classroom activities become integrated. I guess, you know, what they're talking about right there is that the portfolio would become the instrument to do the delivery of the course. I don't know if I have if I agree with that too much. I always believe our course content and our objectives and competencies are really what's important, and that we fit everything to meet those things. But here It may be just a whole different way to look at things. The portfolio is the instrument to deliver the course. So I don't know. I'll have to think about that one a while. How they work: you pretty much collect all the things that go into that portfolio, organize it in a logical manner, then show it off. Now, before we all go jump and run to start integrating portfolios into our curriculums tomorrow, we need to kind of look at the content there and also the age or developmental level of the student. You know, there may be a time where you may not want to do this if the student's kind of young, can't kind of organize these things themselves, maybe not in elementary school, but yet maybe junior high, high school, adults. This may become more appropriate. But we'd have to kind of, you know, make that call right there. The content ought to reflect the curriculum that's being studied or taught. That's kind of a no-brainer. Content can be from several areas, so as long as they are all related to the curriculum of interest, you know, you can pull from all kinds of parts of the course and see. Like in this case, if you would be doing a portfolio on what the student read, then you can go across many different curriculum areas. You know, what they read in science, what they read in math, what they read in English, literature, whatever. And so you can pull a whole lot of different areas into one portfolio there. And so, some guidelines on how to create and use portfolios. An example for reading for first grade. Doesn't look like you're going to have a whole lot of written kinds of things for a student because they're just learning how to write, but yet you can do an oral report. They could tape a report, maybe videotape it, where they talk about what they read. And so later on, in the 7th grade, when they are adept at writing, then they can then put that down on paper or else have it typed out one way or the other. And so that would be maybe an appropriate time for hard copies of portfolio items. And so the purposes of the portfolio would be to make comparisons across students. Every student's portfolio will be unique, and you can kind of gauge their achievement based on what's in their portfolio across classrooms and across schools. And these would certainly allow feedback to improve learning because the teacher and the student would be would be asking questions, giving feedback back and forth about the contents of the portfolio. And then, of course, you can also involve the parents in the learning process, since you'd allow them also to view the portfolio, and that would give some evidence to what little Johnny or Susie is learning there in your classroom. So to summarize, portfolios provide an alternative method of assessment for particular topics, especially where objective measures might fall short. And let's face it, there's always some subjective methodology in our evaluation of students. It's not for assessing every outcome in every situation. There will certainly be some times where portfolios would be the last thing that you would want to choose to use. And teachers often use both objective and subjective measurements in assessing student progress. Well, we do that all the time. We give them some objective tests using all of the test items that we just learned about. And then, you know, for their performance assignments where they will build something or do something that we can evaluate, then we'll make a subjective evaluation of their coursework. And so portfolios will also allow you to do the same thing.